Hello, everyone. My name is David. I'm the General Counsel at SoftBet, and thank you for joining me today. I will be speaking about two things that are very important and close to my heart. One will be compliance, oddly enough, and the second one will be astronomy. I wanted to try to combine the two to try to compare the evolution of our online gambling industry. Actually, I'm very happy that we found a telescope because I was trying to connect the concept of space to the lecture, so it was either that or a tinfoil on my head, so good thing that we found a telescope. I want to start at the beginning. At first, there was nothing. There was no up, there was no down, there was no right, and there was no wrong. The universe of our online gambling industry simply did not exist. We had no internet. We had no progress. We had no technology. We had no gadgets. And the idea of having fun back in the days was much more simpler. The concept of emails was very differently. Life was simpler. Having dinner with the family looked something like this. But then something happened. Something changed our life quite significantly. Technology hit us. It started off with the sprouts of internet, with modems that crackled and cracked their ways into connecting us to the world and the internet, which was very much in infancy in those days. We moved on to more sophisticated devices, like phones, and then we made them smarter and faster and more complicated and faster. So much so that technology completely consumed our lives. So rest assured, this is how my living room looks like these days. The technology literally sits down in the middle. You remember that family from the beginning? Well, unfortunately, this is how they look like today. And this is how my dinners looks like on days that I go home. But it's not all bad, because technology helped us achieve many other things. We're connecting between each other in also many ways. We're having ways to, like the streaming that we have before, to connect us to the world in different aspects. Technology changed us a lot. We are using social media to communicate with the world. We're using Amazon to make purchases. We're using different coins. Our concept of what money is even changed. We're using Uber to travel from one place to the other, so you're basically all over the place. There's one more place that it's quite took control of our life, which is our own industry. So back in the days, casino looked like this. But slowly and surely, we moved to something that looked like this, with casinos on web pages. And later on, and eventually, we've developed to this. And with the introduction of AI, who knows what the future will bring. But there was one repercussion of this very fast and explosive big bang of technology. It caught regulators by surprise. Regulators were not prepared to what came ahead. There were simply no regulations regarding online gambling back in the days. And the outcome is that gambling in its infancy stage was wild. It was uncontrolled. There was no rules or regulation that would govern the operation of any operators. A few decades ago, regulations in Europe was either scarce or completely non-existent. Not to say that there was no regulation regarding gambling itself, but online gambling, which was an emerging concept a couple of decades ago, simply did not exist, and therefore regulation around it did not exist as well. The conclusion? It was chaos. Chaos that followed the big bang of technology. Now, we have a very capable design team in SoftBet that helped me build this presentation. But I thought that the best depiction of chaos would be the picture that my daughter helped me pick up on the internet. Chaos. It was a mess. Players were not protected. It was a jungle out there. Operated, hunted for players, and they operated in an uncontrolled environment. The gap, or sometimes the complete lack of regulation, resulted with less and less and safer environments for players. People could have lost their houses, could have lost their cars. There was no controlling or governing body with an effective means to actually stop them. The balance between operators and regulators, on the other hand, far tended to the operator side, who were operating without any restriction. Legally, because there was simply no there, but nevertheless without any restrictions. The difference between the regulatory stage and the unprotected environments for players woken up a sleeping giant. The regulator tried to expedite the regulatory process. They turned the table. And they've started a rapid regulatory process in Europe. So over the last couple of decades, we've seen more and more territories being regulated and more restriction being imposed on operators and sometimes also on users themselves. This was the cooling down of our online gambling industry. Everybody wanted a piece of the pie. The element of protecting players was one element out of many. Obviously, the other one was the fact that there are increased fees or payments for licenses the regulators wanted to put their hands on, which is fair. But that created another acceleration of the process, because the absence of regulation equals absence of taxation. And the faster you get regulations, the faster you get taxation, and you actually see something for the money. So chaos became order, as more and more regulations in Europe started regulating and enacting rules that will govern the lives of operators and that will govern the lives of users themselves. But they did it too good of a job. We've seen more and more regulation being enacted and more restrictions. Regulators presumably have been more efficient around what they do, but they've imposed so many restrictions on operators that they cooled off our universe, the online gambling universe, too much. And I want to stop a second and tell you a story, a personal story, my personal story. A year ago, I visited New York, and like any New Yorker, I took the subway. And in the subway, I came across this image. Now, this is AI, yes, but this is a point where technology failed me. I swear to God, I tried to find a photo that I took on the subway that showed this joke, because I wanted to tell it to my friends, and I couldn't find it. But here we have 4 MTA workers trying to change a single light bulb. Now, this is because safety regulations in New York requires them to secure the area, and another one to secure the ladder, and apparently one to hold the lamp, and the other one, I have no idea what he's doing. But as you can see, safety regulations, in this case, wanted to protect the people who are changing the light bulb and the people who are taking the train itself. But it also the result is a ridiculous situation in which we are using too many resources in order to achieve a goal that could have been reached far more simpler and more efficient. It was unnecessary. Going back to our universe, we, as operators, are working in an environment today that is so restrictive that we're basically driving a car today having no wheels. We can't steer the car anywhere we want to because there are too aggressive restrictions that apply to us. And the result? Accidents. Regulatory accidents. Financial accidents, because people cannot support their operation anymore. But nevertheless, accidents. So what do we do? After the cooling off of our universe, the power shifted to the regulator. No insult to any regulator, I just wanted to empower you, so I gave you the Hulk. But we're left with Mr. Travolta here having no clue what to do. So we had a very aggressive regulation that drove off a lot of the regulated operators out of the market. We became to a situation where our universe cooled down so much that is not sustainable. It doesn't sustain life. It doesn't sustain us as operators. The solution, we need to find balance within the force. We need to find a place anywhere between chaos and a far too aggressive cooling off of our universe. Somewhere that we as operators can live and operators can rest assured that their protection on the elements that are crucial for them, for example, protection of players, is maintained. We need to have the ability to drive our ship or to drive our car and to make sure that we are sustainable as operators as well. I want to take another pause to talk about another regulation. Many years ago, when I started my legal career, I dealt a lot of regulation, not necessarily in the online gambling. But I was there when data protection was in its infancy stage as well, far before global data protection regulations. But I think that global data protection regulation is actually a good example of how regulation should be implemented. GDPR is not a specific set of regulation. It is what it is. It's a general set of regulations that allows data controllers some flexibilities in the way that they conduct their business. For example, data protection regulations imposes an obligation on data controllers to apply safety measures, security measures on the protection of data. But they don't tell them what measures they need to implement. They give the data controller the ability to choose which measures are best suitable in order to protect the data. And the competition between data controllers, and sometimes even the fines that are imposed by the data protection authorities, encourage those data controllers to implement the stricter measures. There's a competition between the data controllers and who's safeguarding the information better. There are some data controllers that don't hold data on European operators or who do not necessarily work in Europe. They're actually adhering to data protection regulations because they are easy regulation to comply with. They are reasonable and they are subject to reasonable interpretation. So people choose to adopt them. And this is what I want for the online gambling industry as well. And I'm talking to operators here and regulators alike. We need to create a flexible and balanced approach. I have 4 items that I wanted to focus as a solution, or things that I think should be balanced when it comes to online gambling regulation. The first is market entry limitations. We have seen more and more territories in Europe right now that are imposing hefty and large amounts just to acquire licenses. Some of them reaches 7 million and even more in terms of licenses, depending on the sort of license that you're choosing to take. And this pushes out small-scale operators from the market. Taxation. We have seen taxation increase across Europe on a constant basis. That results with a decrease and minimization of the profit margin for us as operators. And once again, when an operator looks at it, they choose to go out. They leave a vacuum. Unbalanced approach to advertisement and promotions. Restrictions on advertisement or complete ban of the ability to promote our business results in a situation that we cannot promote our products. We're at a store at the end of the street and nobody knows that we're there. And that drives regulated operators out of the markets. And finally, technical requirements that requires a lot of resources from us as operators. And they vary between one market to the other, sometimes quite significantly. You have a set of reporting against one regulation and a different set of reporting in a different regulation, and one certification here and a different certification there. Instead of having a homogeneous approach, like the global data protection regulations. So all of this results in a situation where regulated operators, the one that we want to encourage entering into the market, actually looking at it and saying, this is not the place for me. This is not the universe that I want to be. It has cooled down so significantly that I cannot sustain life in it. The conclusion, we need to find a good place in the middle, a balance that will allow the regulators to make sure that we are, and they are happy, and that they are sustaining the principles that are important to them, such as player protection, taxation, and other elements. And on the other hand, our ability to make money and sustain our living in those markets. We need to find a balance. We need to make sure that the regulator and Mr. Travolta are similarly happy. In conclusion, my opinion is, and if you guys agree with me, is that we as operators need to make sure that we are offering the regulators what they want. We need to compete between ourselves on player protection and other regulatory aspect, but we need to encourage and explain to the regulators that if they push us too much, we will end up leaving the market, and the vacuum that we will fill will only be filled by unregulated operators that will not comply with them. We need to help each other achieve the same goal. Thank you very much.
So I select on 2-1 and live with some brothers.